Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the next session. My name's Owen Ellis, the chairman of the AV User Group. We're a community of end users that get together in multiple locations now across the world. And I've brought some of our esteemed members along today. We come to this show every year, and Infocom in the US and many other shows around the world, and we're always looking at new technology. And obviously the suppliers would love us to buy their new technology. But as end users of the technology, actually adopting them and building them into our standards and getting them productionized and making sure they're secure on our networks is a challenge that we all face as end users. And sometimes I think that the suppliers forget what some of those challenges are actually like for us. So we've brought a few of our colleagues along today to talk about those challenges. I have some questions of my own for them, but we're here for you to ask them questions mainly. We want you to ask them questions about the challenges of new technology adoptions. So if you have questions, please stick your hand up and we'll have the Catchbox microphone out to you, and you can put your questions to the panel. But before we start, I'd just like each of them to introduce themselves. We're actually missing a panel member that might turn up during the course of the session, but we'll plough on anyway. So Gary, would you like to go first, please?
Thank you very much, Owen. My name's Gary Keehne. I'm from Google. I run a team called Room Experience Engineering, which is a design team that designs Google's conference rooms, and at the moment Google supports a fleet of around 16,500 conference rooms, and my team owns the design proposition all the way through the product lifecycle.
David.
Yes, hi, my name's David Pammenter. I'm from the University of Edinburgh. I've been there for around 10 years now. I spent 5 years in the design team, audiovisual design team, and now I specifically work for the business school doing all their designs for new rooms, but also a lot of front user support, which I quite enjoy because it gives me a good balance when I come to design rooms.
Roy?
Okay, my name's Roy Sol Farley. I work for a company called Arup. We're based in central London. I came from a operations background, so I was AV manager looking after the technicians that would go and support our users in Arup. Now I'm tasked with trying to drive global standards throughout the business, and that's for video conferencing and desktop conferencing, and trying to give the user that easy to use experience from desktop to meeting rooms.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. So I'll kick the questions off. So apart from coming to ISE and get dragged into sessions like this, you obviously come with a plan for your businesses. Are you both looking at just new technologies that you can take back and see if they'll fit into your workplace, or are you coming here having already collected user requirements and are looking for technologies to fit those user requirements? Gary, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you. A little bit of both. I think with the sheer scale of ISE, and it feels that every year it gets ever bigger, you're in the position where you're going to find something new and unusual which you didn't expect. So literally putting in the miles is worth it. And we found a number of items, manufacturers, relationships, however you choose to look at it, which are fairly core to our proposition at the moment, which were happy accidents in the first place. We genuinely sort of stumbled across them. So I think as painful as the scale of ISE can be at times, it's worth it to be able to come across these organisations, as typically you're not going to be able to do that in the rest of the year. But yeah, at the same time, we come here with specific propositions that we're looking for that are, again, based on a consolidated understanding of what our users are looking for and how that reflects itself in a roadmap. Sometimes we're also coming here to potentially seal a commercial deal as well, where we know something's coming to market. And again, we're looking to try that out, potentially at scale as well, knowing that, again, ISE is typically an environment in which new product gets launched too.
Okay, thank you. Roy, before you come, and if you're collecting user requirements, do you have quite a solid process at Arup for how you engage with your user community and tease those requirements out of them before you come to the show?
What we do specifically in Arup is that sometimes the user doesn't know what experience they want to get. So what we do is we come to the show, try to gather the information and the technologies that we believe in IT would help benefit our users to be more productive. So when I come to the show, it's for a couple of things. It's to sometimes meet up with the manufacturers that I normally talk to on video, and it's nice to come and meet them at the show and have that face-to-face. Also, we get an update from the manufacturers on any new products, because they tend to launch them either at ISE or Infocom. So it's always good to come to the show to get those updates. And as I say, also looking around for any new technologies or ways of working that we could take back to the business and look at, analyse, and see if that would help our users to be more productive in the work they do.
And David, let's start talking about maybe some of the challenges of when we're trying to select those technologies and take them back into your particular environment, higher education, that you face when trying to implement them.
It is very difficult. I've been quite a lucky position compared to Central IS now, being in a business school. I've got a bit more sort of flexibility to do things, and also I've got a lot more user engagement with the staff on a day-to-day basis to find out what they like, what they don't like. But I think engagement is really hard, especially across the board. And I think sometimes within business, and these guys can correct me if I'm wrong, quite often you can go out and you kind of got your meeting room built and you can go into your meeting rooms, but you're standardising things. You try to standardise things so it makes it all easier for you. We had a questionnaire we put out to the staff, and the questionnaire sort of came back, and what came out of it was everybody wanted different things. But within a university, you've got to sort of deliver that. So not everything. You look at the individual things and see what's possible and what you can develop, but you have to try and create a whole lot of different rooms. And then hopefully when it comes time to timetable, and these people know, right, this is a room for me, this is a room for me. I'm a traditional lecturer, I want to go for that. There's usually a lot of fighting around timetabling time to get those sorts of rooms.
We were having a discussion about this, I think, yesterday at our seminar. And I guess you probably go through a similar process where you will try and boil down the similarity between the requests to see if you can develop a standard, and then maybe deal with exceptions to those standards wherever possible, so that you get some level of consistency through it. Mate, Roy, you're suggesting you want to make a comment?
Yeah, because sometimes the technology giants brings out their strategy that you have to then learn to adopt for your users. A couple of those I could name is like Cisco Spark and Microsoft Teams. Just as we're kind of getting our users used to Skype for Business, suddenly a technology giant like Microsoft brings a whole new way of working into the marketplace. And then just as the users are starting to familiarize themselves on how they're working with Skype for Business, they're going to have to start learning to work with either Teams or Cisco. So it's not always just us that's driving the new way of working. It's also the manufacturers and, as I say, some of the technology giants that are changing the landscape that we as the support for the business are having to try to understand, test, validate, and then roll out.
Gary, you work within a technology giant.
I do, yes.
What are your experiences in this area?
I guess I can talk in that sense, from a position of luxury. We made a strategic decision some years ago now, because we felt that our third-party vendor of video conferencing kit couldn't scale to a point where they could support us. And that was partially financially driven. It got very, very, very expensive, partially from a support perspective as well. And partially they couldn't deliver at the speed that we wanted them to deliver change at. And again, we're as a small technology giant, as we were at that time, we were in a position where we could say, okay, we're going to do this ourselves. And we will actually author our own solution. that's been challenging at times. I think it's fair to say we've made every single mistake you could make. But we've also been able to learn how to optimize a number of systems and processes that mean that we can work at speed, that mean that we can deliver what our customers are looking for, and that enable us to pivot as well. And to go back to Roy's point, I think one of the key challenges here is when you are in a position where those major and potentially significant changes are out of your control, actually really what you need to be developing is the ability to pivot as well, and to be able to manage change coherently and quickly on a global basis.
So you mentioned cost, which is obviously a factor for all of us when we're procuring technology and implementing new technology. But when it is a new technology and you have like a testing process or a laboratory process or a pilot process to get something into production, does that cost get considered in the overall scheme before you can even think of adopting a new technology?
The short answer is yes. I mean, it has to, because again, we all have cost imperatives that we're working to. And I think it's probably worth sort of drilling into cost a little bit more, because you can often find that the cost is not necessarily just the increased cost of buying in a new piece of hardware. You need to think through the costs of change. And again, typically as your fleet scales up, there's hidden costs of change or hidden problems in there that you're only going to uncover by going out and trying to change. So again, over time, I think you develop a far more nuanced idea of actually what change incorporates in its totality and the costs of those changes as well. So the hardware change is often just a headline number. When you begin to look at the potential impact on the amount of square footage that you need, then you might be driving up change from a real estate perspective. It doesn't come out of your budget, but you're driving someone else's bill up. Are you looking at infrastructure changes as well? Are you spiking the IT bill as well? You need to think through that too. And again, there's just a whole series of different costs.
Like a knock-on effect, almost a domino effect with cost.
Yeah, there really is. Yeah.
David, you and I were talking the other day about a slightly different challenge with cost, which was probably more aligned with budgets and the way funding occurs in your particular sector, and that often the adoptions are driven in a slightly different way, which is by projects, almost by building or refurbishment projects. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the challenges of that?
Yeah, sometimes, quite often, on a yearly sort of basis, we'll get our pot of money, and it's like we must spend this money within this time, and there's always the pressures of doing that. But we have a massive estate. Edinburgh University's got a huge estate. I think technology-wise, we've got over 350 rooms. It would be great if that was all in one big building, and we could do, refurb one bit at a time and refurb another bit at a time. But between sort of AV and IS and estates, they don't always talk as well as they should talk, and quite often you'll find out, oh, actually, we're going to completely redo this room. Can you come in and do the AV? And of course, we won't have heard of it until after we've submitted our budgets for that year, and you're like, well, we could do that room, but where can we get the money for that? And I think going forward, it's just about good communication, and really having somebody, especially in the States, who understands, the impact of them making all these changes. Even on small things. I mean, when I'm doing small rooms, quite often I'll say to the building manager, I want to do these rooms. Please make sure when you do these rooms, I'm going to get the kit taken out, and I want you to paint them. and it's silly little things like that, because if you don't manage that and communicate with the estates, that won't get done. And what I've seen happen before is a room's been refurbished, and then they're like, oh, we need to paint this room, and you go back and you see like little white flecks of paint all over your nice new AV kit, because they've sort of not really bothered to cover it up very well. And yeah, it's key is communication between estates and all the other departments as well is key, and just getting them to understand what you're trying to achieve. And yeah.
Okay. And Roy, obviously you have now global standards.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at adopting a new technology, it's not necessarily driven by a single building, or might it be a new office that's opening or being refurbished that can drive you into looking at new technologies because it creates an opportunity?
Yeah, no. When we look at new technology, it's actually for the business throughout. What, as I say, I try to do is that I'm looking for global standards. So if I look at new technology, let's take Microsoft and Teams for example. We need to test it. We need to understand how it works. We need to know that the AV kit that we've got in the meeting rooms currently will be able to implement the functionality that Teams would bring to the business. It's not just the video call-in or the IM presence, it's all the touch functionality that you may want to use from, because I think the idea with Teams and Spark is that it's more of a walk up and collaborate with the device to get the most out of the product. When we talk about user adoption, we've been trying to introduce touch displays into Arup for 4 years. And we've got about a couple of dozen touchscreens spread around the globe. But what we find is that it's kind of a cultural thing in the sense that, I'm trying not to be ageist here, but you'll find that the younger people may be a bit more easier to go up and use touchscreens. And one of our engineer, who is around his early 30s, he was the one he's driving BIM with touch capability. And when he showed it to our deputy chairman, who is in his mid-50s, he never saw the point of it. It's not that he wasn't going to push back on it, but it's a cultural thing of...
Generational issue.
Yeah. Thanks. I was trying to find a nice way of putting it. But obviously, as technology comes along, they want to bring in these new ways of working that people are just not ready to, and when I say people, different types of people are just not ready to adopt or never will adopt.
So this is where I guess we come to the question of user experience, which everybody talks about these days, how important the user experience is. And if that user experience isn't right, it's going to make your jobs of getting the new technologies adopted much more challenging. So Gary, how do you, so you're collecting requirements from clients, and you're always going to be thinking ultimately about the user experience and them adopting that technology and the adoption being successful. You have processes in place for measuring that before, during and after, or do you just do it at the beginning and then it's kind of like your team that makes all the decisions? Or
bloody hell, that's a question, isn't it? That's the describe everything question. All right, so deep breath.
Well, you can pick one. We'll go to one of the others for the other bit.
Okay, so let's have a think about which question I should answer out of those. Okay, how about it? I'll start off with what I think are the fundamentals, and then maybe you can pick up and take that further. So I think there's certain elements that you have to have in place before you attempt to change. Yeah, and again, I'm speaking now as someone who runs a big network, and again, we've learnt this through getting it wrong and then fixing it. So I think the simplicity of the experience is absolutely paramount, because to assume that your customers are constantly using the technology that you're providing to them and therefore can remember how to use it and turn that almost magically into a well thought out user experience, that doesn't happen. Yeah. If you're creating complexity in the way in which you're asking one of your customers to interface with your technology, you're likely to drive your adoption down. You're going to make it a negative process. So we believe in radical simplicity, to the point where we've stripped out the majority of the technology that we used to have in rooms that we don't see a compelling usage case for anymore. So the vast majority of our rooms are stripped back to individual and group video conferencing and a whiteboard, yeah, and no more, because we recognise that for us that meets 85% of our user needs. And when we look at our user needs and we aggregate them together, we come up with what we call the collaborative profile of the business. So we understand actually how our individual business units, in the majority of cases, want to collaborate. And the profile at Google is small group, so typically up to 7 people. It tends to be vocal as well. We're an organisation that's engineering-based and is looking to solve problems. So much of the work that goes on is discussion and active debate. It's predominantly across distance as well, because again, we're global teams. We do a lot of virtual work too, and it's unusual to have a complete team in one physical, co-located environment as well. So, we understand from that, again, this concept of radical simplicity means that if you can do that, you're beginning to deliver a standardized experience. And a standardized experience will, if it's a good one, will win you trust with your users, and they'll come back time and time again. You can also drive reliability through that as well, so you tend to have a more robust environment, which again delivers more trust. And when it comes to change, because you've got a uniform environment, you can change relatively quickly. And so the speed of change for your customers is uniform as well. So again, you don't abuse that trust by taking your fleet and sort of splitting it off into micro different portions that you then try and put together back later on.
Okay. Did anyone have any questions from the floor at this point? I'm conscious that I'm looking sideways and can't see if anybody's... no questions at the moment?
Is it muted?
Hello. There we are.
Okay.
Yes, I have a very simple question after a long pause. You talked a lot about budgets, you talked a lot about end users, you talked about delivering new technology, and you talked about the aged chairman, sorry, the 55-year-old chairman. How, in part, you've got to include training in this, but what role does benefit to the end user play in the training? Which means that, look, we've put in this new technology, this is going to enable you to do this, this is going to make your job easy. How much do you sell it in?
Who wants to take that one first? David?
Well, yeah, I can definitely talk. I do a lot of training within the business school. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. I offer a lot of training. I think my biggest issue, and I think for the rest of university, and I'm not sure how it works out with education, is actually getting academics to engage and turn up to anything. Whether that's a training or actually just getting involved before we do a project. But I offer the training all the time, and when you see people turning up to the training, they get an opportunity to see what the new things are, and they can see what they can do with it. So they've got their own ideas about what they can do with it. So it's quite nice for the other people at the training who might come up with an idea, and they're like, well, I could adopt that as well. But yeah, the training is a very important part, but actually I think more important is actually trying to get people there in the first place. And I don't know how do you do that within the corporate world? Can you force people to turn up?
So to answer from a Arup point of view, what we do is when somebody new starts in Arup, they get an induction email. In the induction email is the way that we communicate, and we do so like room bookings, how we communicate, if we're going to have visitors come, we have to register the visitors so that their badges are prepared for them. Let's go back to the induction. The induction has links to videos to say how you use your personal virtual meeting room for when you want people to come in and have. What we're looking to do now is that we know that a lot of people, when they start, they don't use the videos, they don't read any induction materials, they don't use the user guides. I mean, we try to give the onus to them to say, right, you're starting a new company, read or click on. You don't have to do it straight away, first, second, third day, but, the idea is to try to click on these links and to look at the training material that's provided. Most of the services we offer, as I say, how to use Skype for Business, how to share your desktop, how to have audio conference calls, how to have video conference calls with your VMR, how you use Condeco to book your... All this is there for them. We don't have the budget to have individual trainers throughout Arup offices regionally and globally. So we have to, like most people do, is use videos and documentation to drive that process.
So I think, again, this was a conversation that came up, I was involved in yesterday, that it's almost like the user has an expectation that, like their smartphone or their laptop, they don't need an instruction manual. they should just be able to pick it up and use it. And are you finding that's driving the way that the user interface is, and how are you dealing with that, and are you finding it successful? Are you finding it very challenging within the AV world at Google?
So I'm lucky. I'll be the outlier here, because again we generate our own user interface. Yeah. So if we get it wrong, we know we've got it wrong as well. The challenge we set ourselves was that to start a meeting should be one touch and no more. Yeah. And that meant a lot of other compromises, but we knew that by making the joining of a meeting as simple as possible, we would at least get people joining those meetings. Yeah. And again, I think we all know like the stats about typically an hour-long meeting takes about 8 minutes until it settles down and everyone has joined in through their various different forms of technology. And we just saw that 8 minutes as the thing we should go after first. Because again, if we can get to the point where we're taking that 8 minutes and reducing it down to seconds, yes, there's a productivity uptick, and that's useful, but I don't think people go home and say, hey, guess what I did at work today? I saved myself 16 minutes of meetings. Yeah. And there's not like a chief collaboration time-saving officer who's aggregating all of that as well. It's just the thing about, I had a good day today. I had a productive day. That shit worked in the way it was meant to. We thought we would go after that.
But I've got to challenge that, because just as yourself, Gary, we're starting to do the same thing, to do the one-touch dialing. We've got two environments. We've got Skype for Business and we've got the Cisco environment. And we've just invested so that if you send a Skype for Business meeting to the Cisco touch panel, you can join the meeting by pushing the button. Because for many years in Arup, we had an AV team that would schedule the call. We have pushback from certain users or certain hierarchical users that want to walk in and have it all up and running. I mean, you've worked in a banking environment, so you know that type of atmosphere. So our challenge is, even though we're offering, and I'm 100% behind what Gary's saying, because we're trying to adopt that now in our global standards, it's trying to get the users to realize that it doesn't have to be up and running for them. Just walk in when you're ready, when you've settled down, you've got your papers out, you've stirred your sugar in your teas, and and then just push the button when you're ready. That meeting's going to be there, and for us, the one-touch join button will end 10 minutes before the meeting ends.
So for adopting new technologies for you, you're often considering two use cases. One which is the masses, and one which is senior management that are always going to throw a separate challenge your way, and so that has to be considered when you're adopting and deploying new technologies, that you might get that pushback.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just Arup, because I've worked in other corporate enterprises, and that mentality still exists in certain places.
David, you indicated that you'd had a project where you'd collected a client requirement, and that you felt that the solution that was needed was VMRs that Roy was just talking about, and then you had a lack of success in adoption. Can you talk a little about that and explain what the reasons were for was the lack of success around people not willing to adopt? Was it about the user interface?
This is actually about a lecturer. We're moving now into obviously doing some more lectures online. With the business school, I've been delving into that for the last wee while. We run MBAs, but we also run MBuzz. They do weekend online. Now, some of our lecturers are really engaged, and like these gentlemen here, we were just talking about empowering the user. We want to empower the user. Every time, I don't want users coming to me and say, oh, can you come and help me with this? That's sort of a desire line thing, because it's the easiest route. Rather than going online, watching the videos, reading that, the easiest thing is like, oh, well, but you could just phone them and they'll come and help you. Sometimes it's quite hard to say, no, we can train you on that, and you can do that. But this... Going back to this specific sort of case, we had one lecturer who got really involved. He spent a lot of time setting up virtual meeting rooms online. He got the EMBA students in, and they all went away to their own rooms. We tested this a lot as well. We did a lot of testing with this beforehand. So he'd invested a lot of time in this. And when he ran his class, it was brilliant. It worked perfectly. Then we've got the other lecturer. I'm not saying these are specific people, but it's still kind of two groups as well. and he wanted to teach online exactly how he taught in the classroom. And no matter what you try to do, and he was like, oh, it's the technology isn't there for me. And you try to explain you can't teach online the same way that you teach in a classroom. We can help you do this. I think we've even set up somebody to come in from another part of the university that does training on online teaching, and they just actually weren't interested. And because this person's quite senior, it's quite difficult to push that, actually.
So that's almost that's like a user that's unwilling to change the way they do things, even if what you're offering is likely ultimately to make their job easier for them.
Yes.
Interesting. Gary, you mentioned in one of the things you said earlier about reliability, and of course that brings into the question around support, both the way you provide that internally and how that impacts you and how big a challenge that is, but also the support that you get from the supplier and the considerations around that support you need to make, especially maybe if it's a technology or a supplier that you have no previous experience with. Can you, how do you kind of, how big a decision is that when you're looking at new technologies?
It's a very big one. And typically we'll soak test for a number of months before releasing anything. So, we've learnt to resist the temptation to go to market with new technology because it's new technology. And so again, understanding, having a deep understanding of how to improve the user experience often filters out a lot of the enthusiasm about adopting a new technology as well, because it actually doesn't do that. Also understanding, again, the cost of implementing change across a big network, that also filters out quite a lot of the remaining enthusiasm as well. So it gets you to the point, once you've done the testing, where you think, you know what, I'm going to be able to do this and probably sleep at nights for the next couple of weeks, because it'll work. Because, again, we've invested enough thinking and testing time in it that we're comfortable with this.
And if you're working, say you're working with a manufacturer that you have maybe many years of experience of previous product, do you automatically think a certain level of reliability, or do you just we take no chances, we go through the full process?
I said we'd made all the mistakes.
Yes.
We made that one.
Yeah. I can imagine. And obviously you mentioned the network, so we're going to talk about the obvious issue of security. So, Roy, do you want to start us on the challenge of security when you're deploying or trying to deploy new technologies, and how much of a barrier that is to getting through the process and getting them into production?
Yeah, well, as you know, I sit in IT. My line manager is an IT person. So basically, in that domain, everything is security. What we do is we have a proper security team, and what we do is we look at the product that we want to implement, we test it, but we also share the design for our security team to have a look at, to make sure that they're comfortable with the way we want to, say, break out of our firewall. If we need to, break out, I forgot the word now, but have it checked and then come back in again and say, right, now it can make the, for example, we talk to many different soft clients. There's many of them out there. And there's one that's used by a book reseller. And we had issues that platform wouldn't work in our internal network because the certain ports that they wanted to be open to make the video communication was just not possible. It worked fine on our guest network, but not our internal network. We were getting pushed hard to make it happen on our internal network, but it was not possible. And so we just had to tell the parts of the business that needed to talk on that platform that they're going to have to just log into the guest network, and until we in IT is able to find a way of a workaround, or unless the manufacturer realizes that the platform they're using isn't secure enough.
Were you able to feed that back to the manufacturer?
No, because we didn't have the direct relationship. Our consultants did.
Okay.
But from their point of view, it's our problem not the
They
manufacturer's
considered
problem.
that a problem with
It's internal,
your
yeah.
network.
IT should just open up everything. And there'll be a part of a presentation I'll do later on this week that IT have restrictions on the network and security for reasons.
Yeah.
But it's
So-
hard getting that message over to people that don't really understand the intricate details.
Yeah, so this begs the obvious question that, audio-visual systems started to be plugged into the network 10, 15 years ago. An RJ45 would appear on the back and you plug it in and away you go. And we spent years impressing on the manufacturers what needed to be built into these devices to secure them and make them secure on our networks. And we're now 10, 15 years down the line. How good a job do you feel that they're actually doing of that? Do they understand? Are they meeting those requirements? Who wants to go first?
No, I'm going to say that a lot of them are getting better. We're at the moment, we're testing several DSPs that we are using to register to our Skype for Business platform. And on security certification, that normally my colleague used to say that when an AV kit was delivered, they used to have self-signed certificates, which in the IT world is a complete no-no. And that's been fed back to manufacturers, and they understand that, that can't exist anymore. And they have got a lot better. So from a new kit perspective, we find that security out of the box is a lot better. What we in IT have to do, as I say, is normally just test it, share it with our security networks team to make sure that they're happy with the way it works before we implement it.
David, do you want to comment?
I could do. One of the things that's kind of is worrying me at the moment. Well, first of all, I think you're right. I think now the AV manufacturers, back in the day, they were just sticking a network port on it, and then they were just shipping it out. They weren't IT companies, So they've now had to, as we are all seeing the move from AV into IT, they've had to bring a lot more of that on board. And when you look at the products out there, a lot of them are putting in, special security measures on the ports, and like you say about the certificates, and all that's important. We tend to sort of try and ring fence all the AV, so on a private sort of network, so it's protected in that way. I think some of the things that worries me about, obviously the other thing is making sure you do the firmware updates when they come out. You need to look far more now at patching your AV from a security point of view than you did before, whereas it might just be, I'll do this firmware upgrade because, it's not working too well, there's a new driver out for it. It's now, I think we need to look more to actually patching it from a security point of view. And you go around and you see a lot of the smart screens now, and they've all got like some sort of Android built into them. That sort of thing makes me really nervous. It's like one of the first things we do is like, can we disable the Android on that? It's built-in hotspots, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, hang on, that hotspot's on, and it's actually just going straight through to my network. and then you find out people who should have been on the guest network and only held on the guest network are actually able to kind of backdoor into your main network through a Wi-Fi, hotspot on an Android touchscreen.
Gary, I'm going.
on that one.
No, I'm not going to ask you to comment on that one. But I had a separate question for you. You talked earlier about learning. You've learned from your mistakes. So you've made the mistakes and you've had failures.
Oh, yeah.
Working at an organisation like Google, I imagine there's a lot of support for adopting new technologies and being seen to be leading. But then you do make mistakes, and I assume that you've learned to put processes in place so that you can recover. So can you kind of talk us through how that works when you've maybe there's a case study about one that didn't particularly go as well as you anticipated, or?
So I think, so I'm going to answer that in a slightly roundabout way, because otherwise I'd just sit here and talk for hours about mistakes, and I'm not sure anyone really wants to hear that. So if you sat down with our CIO, Ben Freed, and said, Ben, what do you and what does your organisation do? He would say, we are here to make tools that make Googlers uniquely productive. Yeah? If you then sit down with Dave Radcliffe, who's the head of real estate, you say, Dave, what do you do and what does your team do? He says, well, I'm here to create spaces that make Googlers uniquely productive. And that sort of very simple approach around intent does make life somewhat easier. Yeah? We've got multiple instances of where we work together with our real estate partners, and obviously conference rooms and meeting rooms are one of those areas. And we're at the point now where we co-fund a lot of initiatives, we co-staff them as well, we have joint goals. So we've really embedded that collaboration deeply into the business. But if you say to us, what is it you're trying to achieve? We are trying to make Googlers more productive than they've ever been. If we're not able to show that how we can achieve that before we start, then we're not starting. Yeah? So at its very simplest, we have to show that we can answer that question. And also too, if we're going to, again, implicate someone else's budget by creating a change which sits on their bottom line, we need to get their buy-in as well. You've got to do that. Yeah? So if you say I want to add new technology X to the room, and I need a bit more space for that, so my rooms are going to go up by 10% in terms of their size. For me, fine, no implication of that. For my real estate partners who are building 2,500, 3,000 rooms a year, that's a big number. Yeah. So again, understanding the simplicity of what you're doing, or making what you're doing as simple as possible, so you can say yes or no, are we impacting on that? And then making sure that for all the stakeholders you can actually deliver against that. That's the change that we've put into place. Yeah.
But if you have a situation where you're not getting the success that you planned,
pivot, stop and start again.
Okay, so that's going back to the pivot discussion.
We've learned from the product teams of our biggest products. We've watched how they've learned. We've watched them and we've learned from how they've delivered. And what they've been able to do is deliver products at scale, and make quick changes too. And from a personal point of view, I think the AV industry is still coming to terms with that. So being in an environment where we've actually got peers who we can learn from and whose processes, to an extent, we can copy across and adopt, that's been incredibly useful. So again, our perspective is we're in charge of a product. We're not project-based, we're product-based. We work to regular scheduled updates of that product. We have product roadmaps, we have product catalogues. We'll engage with anyone who wants to tell us about how the product should change, but ultimately we make the call on the pace at which that product changes. But again, if it doesn't come back to showing how it's going to make Googlers more productive, and that we've got our stakeholder buy-in, then we're not even going to start it. But if we start that and it doesn't work, then we stop, we learn from that, we go in a different direction, and we just repeat.
Thank you. Roy. These days, from a manufacturing perspective, a lot of the hardware is becoming a black box, CPU, processing power, and a lot of the skill and the functionality and the uniqueness is built into the software. And that's quite a recent, the last few years. It was all about hardware and the uniqueness of the hardware. If you go back further than that, how well do you think the manufacturers are coping with that when the first release hits the market? Most of the skill is in the software. They know it's easy to come out with a second rev of software, fix problems. Are you finding that's impacting adoption of new technologies? Do you find that you can work well with the manufacturers to give them feedback, to get the changes you need? Is that a process that they've got right yet?
What I'm going to say is that the way we are in Arup, we're in a unique position because there's always this discussion about AV and IT being separate. Arup AV sits under IT. My IT manager, I get involved with a lot of the AV manufacturers. The AV manufacturers are getting first-hand IT knowledge on how to get their products to work in the IT environment. An example of that is a well-known manufacturer who've got into the DSP market, as I was saying earlier. And again, I wouldn't know this as an AV person, but the way certain things need to be configured from the IT world, it was something simple to do with a plus or a one, that where you put the information in was only alpha, not numeric. It was no numbers. And Chris said to him that, I can't register it to the gateway unless I can put in, and within a couple of days, their technical people made sure that they made the changes so that he could then configure the DSP to work in the way that he would have any other kind of software client working. So that's a really good example. And when we deploy AV equipment in Arup, we work with manufacturers that want to talk to us and work with us. There's hundreds and thousands of manufacturers out there. What we look for is obviously a recommendation in the industry. So talking to colleagues, part of the AV user group, what manufacturers have you had success with? What ones have you had problems with? Because first and foremost, if we're going to put something in our meeting space, it needs to be reliable, as Gary said earlier. Then it's the support elements. So as we try to use our AV kit more and more on the IT platform, it has to be able to integrate. That's been configured and tested by the IT people. Me and my background in AV will talk to the AV manufacturers, introduce them to my IT colleague, who will then pick up the conversation, because it's above my kind of understanding, to tell them exactly what they need to do to make it work in the IT world.
Yes, Gary.
Just pick up on Roy's points, because I'm in full agreement with everything you've said, and what we've done is to sort of institutionalise that as well. So we've even adopted the terminology from sort of traditional IT. So we have dev environments, dog food environments, and production environments, and and there's a very strict gateway in between each of those environments as well.
Yeah.
And typically with manufacturers with new product, they're going to be in dev for some significant amount of time, and end users and dev don't interact with each other. A dev environment is a lab environment, and again, we're trying to break the thing that we're working with.
So sometimes what we get is a timescale challenge. So we have a new office that was rolling out in Chicago. The equipment was specified by internal people. I'm in a different environment compared to my two colleagues here, whereas I have internal and external influences. And they picked a manufacturer that we hadn't tested, validated, and it's part of our solution. And IT have had to step back. It's one. There is a manufacturer that we recommend and we support, and one of our other offices went with it. Particular office didn't, and it gets to a point where we can't do anything. We're not going to risk our reputation by suddenly just trying to, because the office is going to be completed in 3 weeks, to get their equipment tested, validated, and signed off as something that we can 100% support.
So, Gary, are you finding that manufacturers are modifying their attitude and their processes towards this, and that they would say to you, okay, we understand that you've got these environments, so let's use you to maybe help us go through alpha, beta testing, so that we can refine it and not deal with that, after the event, if you like?
Yeah, definitely. Again, we have the luxury of building at scale as well, so we have some clout behind that. What we do is we actually sort of try and turn that argument through 180 degrees, because otherwise I think you pick up a reputation for being arrogant, and it can be a well-deserved one as well. So if we say, well, look, we'll work with you in the lab environment to thoroughly test and deconstruct what you give us, and again, we'll give you good quality engineering feedback, but when we go to dog food, so when we actually start to introduce this to users, we'll do it, again, at a speed and a scale that typically you would struggle with yourself. So we'll give you better quality feedback than you're likely to get yourself through your own testing mechanism. And that's a process that we offer to our own internal product teams, and we work on with manufacturers as well. And when you create that joint win, Yeah. Again, that as a manufacturer, you're going to get probably more feedback at a higher quality than you would expect. Then you've got an aligned incentive, and that helps us a lot.
Yeah.
David, you were going to say?
Well, I think it's great. I think it's really great to be able to do that and actually to be able to go through all those processes. I would love to be able to do that, but the issue, we don't have any space to be able to do that, and it tends to be, we need to do a new room. The idea will be to try and, when we do a rollout, is to do a lot of rooms similar, so we might do one room first, but that room is likely to be a live room. And I've found manufacturers still, from my perspective, there's two sort of recently. One, a projector manufacturer, I thought they could really do with helping their end users. I could never get the firmware updates for the kit. And so now I was emailing them saying, why don't you just have all the firmware online where we can log in and download it and, sort stuff out ourselves? Because the odd occasion where they've eventually got back to me and somebody sent me a link and I've maybe been busy doing something else, and then I go to that Dropbox, the link's expired, that's it, it's going to be another 6 months before I can sort this out. But also one of the another example I wanted to bring up was a control company manufacturer. Well, they do a lot of things, a big one. I won't mention who it is. And I'd done this new room, and I was testing out something that was fairly new, sort of touchscreen interface. And in that sort of first 6 months, there'd been 1 or 2 crashes, just ever so slight. Okay, not really anything that was ringing alarm bells. But actually what happened when I then went and I kind of spoke to them about it, there was some firmware updates, seemed to go away, but because it was so intermittent, it was actually really difficult to know it was still a problem. Anyway, I rolled this out across other rooms, and then all of a sudden I was seeing this problem more because obviously it scaled up, and then this problem was happening more. And I was having more of these things lock up on me, and I went back to manufacturers, and they didn't have anything in place. For us, we're sort of in a bit of a, not us, I think everybody here, as the sort of end users, there's stuff for the integrators, I think, for the support for them, and there's different sort of support for us, and this company don't really have a resilient framework in place. They have no ticketing system for us. So if I put in, hey, this is a problem, guys, they'd go, okay, no worries. But that would be then, you wouldn't get like an email or a ticket to follow up to be able to follow that call and see what's happening with it. And this went on for like months, and I kept saying, this is still a problem, guys, we really need to look at this. And eventually I actually had to go quite high up the company. I had to find somebody's address and said, hey, I need your help with this. And then once I'd done that, it got sorted, and they took it and then they tested it for a long time and put it in the test environment. They were like, yes, actually there is a problem. And it did take a long time to fix
Very
it.
quickly,
but
Gary, because we're just about out of time.
Right, so I'm going to suggest then potentially a user group. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to suggest a potential initiative for the user group. So I actually think that there's enough expertise within the user group to codify, to come up with an expectation of what it is that we need for new product being launched. And I'm also going to suggest that we set up a forum that allows us to confidentially exchange our experiences on that as well. So we're going to end up with a good list and a bad list. And as the chairman of the user group,
Thank you, Gary.
Over to you on what you decide to do with those lists.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I think the aim for us this afternoon was to give you an insight into the challenges that end-user organisations face adopting technologies, and I think you can see that we share some common challenges, and in different market verticals we have some unique challenges, which obviously doesn't make it easy for our suppliers, but that's the reality of our world. I'd like to say thank you to Gary, David and Roy for sitting on our panel today. Thank you for coming along and joining us. I hope you found it useful, and thank you to AV Magazine for the hour that you gave us in the theatre. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.